What's up, my fellow small business supporters? I'm Savvy, and welcome back to Savvy Writes Books. Today, we're going to start off the week with a really fun and really special video. If you guys remember, this past Wednesday, I showed the cover reveal for my upcoming novel, 90s Kids, which is a novel that I've been documenting the entire process of writing and editing and revising and getting feedback and all of that on this channel since I started this channel back in 2018. I'll link the playlist up in the cards. I was excited to see the response you guys had to the cover and to see how excited everyone was because, as you guys know, I'll show the cover on the screen again. I am so in love with this cover and how it turned out. And I mentioned in that video that I was actually going to do an interview with the artist who designed this cover, Eric Evanson, to hear about his cover design process, his art process, and how he went through all of that and get an inside look at what a cover designer and artist's work looks like from their own perspective. For those of you who are on my Patreon, you may remember that a couple weeks ago I put out a post on Patreon calling for people to ask questions that they wanted answered from my cover designer. So that was a perk for my Patreon supporters. By the way, this video was brought to you by my Patreon supporters. Check out all of them listed here. And my Patreon supporters who support at $5 a month and up have the option to have their own channels or websites or stores or whatever linked in my video descriptions below. So check out the description below as well because I have so many links to Patreon supporters down there and you guys are going to want to support them and check them out because they are fantastic small business supporters as well. So on Patreon, I had called for people to ask questions and then a bunch of people submitted questions of things that they wanted to know about the cover design process, about graphic design and art and digital artistry and all of that. So I asked Eric all of the questions on our interview, and then I also asked him a few questions about his process of designing this book cover specifically. So I'm really excited to give you guys this inside look into the book cover design process. Let's do it.
Hit you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.
Do you want to introduce yourself and talk about your background as an artist and what the main types of work that you do can be?
Sure, yeah. I am a professor at the University of Wisconsin Stout. I teach illustration adjacent classes, kind of like product rendering. I teach a digital illustration class. I teach concept art. And, you know, some other things here and there. I'm also the director of our graduate program. But prior to teaching, I worked in industry as a graphic designer and illustrator. Mm-hmm. And I originally studied like drawing and painting, fine art at the University of New Hampshire. So I kind of have gone on a weird like trajectory. Mm-hmm. I think illustration was always kind of in my blood. And I definitely remember some painting professors in college kind of commenting on my work being a little illustrative and could I try not to do that? And I was trying not to do that. So, you know, it's a thing you have to kind of work around, I guess. But yeah, I've also dabbled in comic books. I've got a couple of graphic novels out. So if people know me at all, they probably know me from one of my graphic novels, either Gods of Asgard or The Beast of Wolf's Bay. And I also did some work for the Back to the Future series and the Ghostbusters series from IDW Publishing.
Yeah, that's one thing. Okay, so yeah, everyone knows how big of a Back to the Future fan I am. It's impossible to miss. So that's one thing that, like, in every video where I've talked about my book leading up to before the cover design, I've been like, I am so excited to reveal my cover designer. And, you know, partially because of how you've worked on the Back to the Future comics in the past. Like, the day I found that out, I was, like, messaging my friends and being like, my book cover is getting designed by someone who worked on actual Back to the Future comics, like, for real. I was just like going through the roof. I was so excited. And I just, because I bought the Back to the Future comics, and it's just really fun how those like random connections come together. Because I started buying the Back to the Future comic. When did they come out? Like 2014, 15? Like, yeah, I started buying them around then. Yeah. So that's awesome.
Yeah, they kind of coincided, I think, a little bit with the 30th anniversary. And I think it was a licensing thing that IDW had worked out. And Bob Gale, the screenwriter, was involved with writing some of the stories. And he's actually the writer I get to work with on the story I illustrated. So I get to do some back and forth with him and talk about a lot of stuff. Like, fun fact on Bob Gale, he's a big car guy. I'm sure that comes
surprising.
yeah, no surprise. But he had very specific ideas about which cars should be in which panel and in what order. There was a car show that was in the scene that we were in, and so we needed to make sure one was an IROC Z. And I don't know. There's a lot of fun stuff. I think I worked my own 1988 Honda Accord into that panel too.
I love it. How did you first get involved with doing comics especially for like big names like that?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, I know this kind of ties into the themes of some of the things you talk about, but I got into that by doing indie work.
Oh, awesome.
So I had done probably a lot of indie comics work in the New Hampshire and Boston area when I was out of college. And I just was in a group of friends. Most of us were graphic designers, and we were all comic book people. And so we would sort of moonlight and goof off and have fun. And I did like 4-page stories here and there, mostly for projects that never materialized. And then one day I decided I was going to kind of do this passion project that I'd had for a long time of adapting the Norse myths into a graphic novel. I think I was a little frustrated with doing these like 3-page, 4-page short stories, and wanted to kind of command the project on my own. So I did that. It took a few years to really complete, and I self-published that in 2007. And that got me a little bit of notoriety, I guess. And I kind of go around from to conventions, mostly in the upper Midwest, and sell it and promote it, and even to this day. And at one of these conventions, I ran into a guy named Eric Burnham, who's the main writer for Ghostbusters and also worked on the Back to the Future book. And he and I were just seated next to each other. We started talking. We kind of birds of a feather in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Dropping nerdy references and things in the same way. And then turns out he just gave me an opportunity. When an opportunity came up to pitch for a backup story in Ghostbusters, he reached out to me and asked if I wanted to do it. And so I said, yeah, I'd love to do that. It's sort of a lifelong dream to contribute to a property like that. So that's kind of how it worked. That's how I got the work. And then I've had, several experiences with IDW, and I think I've kept having those experiences because of one superpower I have, which is I can deliver my work on time.
Yes. Yes.
Pretty imperative in the comics industry. There's a lot of books that are delayed because artists can't hit the pages or something. And
yeah.
I worked in advertising prior to doing comic stuff, so I'm very comfortable with the idea of hitting a deadline.
Yeah.
And I was always able to do it. And I think I was even early once or twice, and my editor was a little bit surprised.
Yeah, and I've noticed whenever we've been working on the book cover, you turn things around so quickly, and it's whoa, that's even faster than I expected. I guess that there's a lot of efficiency there.
Yeah, I think I don't know. It didn't strike me as being that rare, but I think for a lot of illustrators it can be. But I definitely credit the advertising industry for pushing the idea of deadlines onto me.
So when it comes to book cover design, I know you've designed my book cover. You designed the cover for Confessions of a Teenage Band Geek, which came out this past November. What other work have you done in regarding cover design or things like that? Because there's a few questions related to that. So just kind of get some background so then we can kind of move into some of the questions that people submitted.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a number of different projects. I've never really been totally a book cover person, but I've done a few. I did another young adult book with an called Enter the Bluebird. I did the cover for that. Came out through Kickstarter a few years ago. I do the covers for my own works. So like Gods of Asgard.
Yeah.
I did the cover for that, obviously.
Yeah, and it looks awesome. I love it.
Thanks. Beast of Wolf's Bay, did the cover for that one, obviously. Back when I did more industry work, I think I did one for a estate planning handbook once that a lawyer wrote that was a client of ours. And I've done, I don't know, just things here and there like that. Nothing too major, nothing people would know. But it's something I've always wanted to do more of. So in the last couple of years, I've been able to pick up with that a little bit. So I'm pretty excited to be working on these books with Muse Media.
Yeah, and I'm really excited that you're working on them too. I know that when Christine had first mentioned that like you were someone who could, do book covers and illustrations, I got so excited looking at your work and I loved it. So I guess moving to, I had posted on my Patreon page that I was doing this interview with you and that people could submit questions for the Q&A there. So going to some of those, the first one was basically, how did you get into the field of book cover designing? I know you kind of mentioned some of the, doing some of your own independent work and things like that, I guess. And I mean, I know that with Muse Media cover designing here, you kind of had that connection that you had known Christine from doing marching band work in the past and things like that. So I guess what's the overall story of how you've gotten into book cover designing now that you mentioned you want to do more of it and that kind of thing?
Man, I don't know. I mean, so my position at the university is a little weird. Like I'm not totally a graphic design professor. I'm not really an illustration professor. I'm not, I'm officially a generalist, and I'm the only one. We have dozens of people teaching in our department, and I'm the only one that's officially a generalist.
Okay.
And that becomes, I think, because in industry I really did a lot of generalist work. But for a chunk of time after college, I kind of started off as a publication designer. And so I got my start. I was a studio art major. But I did magazine design for our student campus magazine. We had a glossy magazine at UNH, and I got to basically for a couple of years, I was a paid designer for that magazine, and I learned a lot about. I had a lot of decent instincts about how graphic design worked, but I got to illustrate things. I got to fail a lot too. I got to work a lot of bad choices out of my system. And it was really great. So I kind of got my start that way. The other major organization I did in college was I was in the marching band, of course, which ties into the connection with Halftime quite strongly. But after college I did catalog ads, and then I worked for another magazine as well, like a local lifestyle magazine, and got to do a lot of like illustration that way. So I did more editorial stuff, which isn't unlike book covers, but that's kind of the segue. Editorial illustration and comics kind of just like led me into this, I guess.
That's fantastic. Someone on Patreon had also asked, what of the book covers you've designed so far, which one is your favorite?
Oh man.
Which is a hard question, I know, but I figured I'd ask it because someone wanted to know.
I don't know. I think it's probably the best answer is to say that the one that I'm currently working on is usually my favorite, and that one's currently 90s Kids. So.
Oh, cool. So I get to be the favorite right now. That's exciting. I get that. When people ask me, like, what's your favorite book you've written and things like that, it tends to, like, regularly be the most recent one. I think because we all, improve our work over time, even if it's a subtle difference that from the outside world you might not notice. But I'm like, oh, this is definitely so much more improved than this and things like that. So.
Yeah, I totally think so. With comics work that I've done, usually the most recent thing is my favorite. When I go back to look at projects from 2007 or something, I usually just look. I don't know. My wife is a composer, and she's also a band director, and she's said that when she listens back on recordings of herself playing or conducting, that it's hard to not hear the mistakes.
Yeah.
And if she gives it enough time, then she can kind of work past that. And I think the same is true of visual art too, or probably writing. Which is like, now when I look back on older projects, I can look back a lot more critically because I'm a lot older and more experienced too. So that helps make the most recent thing, I think, be the...
Yeah, I definitely like if I pull one of my older books that I released years ago off the shelf and read it, I'd be like, oh, I would have done this part differently. I would have done this part differently. I mean, I guess I could always do a re-release, but at this point, it's kind of like maybe it just needs to speak for itself. So I definitely get that. It's so much easier to be critical of the work you've done with the knowledge you have of what you're doing now than, yeah. So someone else on Patreon asked about hearing about your process when you go to design a book cover. How do you go about coming up with concepts for the book? Do you read the full book? Do you read a summary? Like, how do you go about that process?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't read the full book. Mm-hmm. I kind of wish I did.
I can send it to you if you want.
Yeah, I would. I would charge more if I did.
That makes sense, because it would take a lot more time. Reading the full novel takes a while, yeah.
Right, but I kind of wish I did because I feel like I could really get a sense for it. But I in a lot of ways, I don't feel like it's necessary. So, like what you did for me is about, I think, what happens, which is like with Confessions of a Teenage Band Geek, it kind of went the same. I get a list of characters and kind of a description of them, their personalities. I get like some pull quotes describing what they're wearing or kind of giving like a pretty important scene in the story. And then I don't know. I mean, with you and with Courtney, we just talked about layout concepts, and we don't want it to be too complicated on the front cover too, because it's not that large a space. It's about 6 by 9 inches.
Yeah.
So you don't want it to be too, I don't know, deep.
Yeah.
Because you have to work a title into there. You have to work characters into there. If it's very character driven, the characters are going to be probably front and center. And I think my strength is in character work anyway. So it strikes me as being important that we want to like kind of highlight the characters. So I kind of stick with that. Technically what I do is I work at this thing right here. This is a Cintiq drawing tablet. It's basically a monitor that plugs into my computer, and it has a stylus. Where did that stylus go? Here it is. There's a stylus. Looks like a pen, just with a little plastic nib. And, I basically just sketch on that nowadays. I've been drawing that way for about 8 years, and I haven't really looked back. I do still draw on paper from time to time, and when I teach sketching, we use paper for a lot of it too, but the majority of what I teach is digital too. So I kind of just now practice what I preach, so to speak.
That's really cool. I might need to get a tablet like that, because I have one of those tablets that's like, you connect it to the computer and you don't see it on the tablet, but you see it on the computer screen. So I do a lot of art where like I'll do a rough sketch on a piece of paper and then I scan it into the computer and then I start doing the digital stuff on top of it. But it does sound cool to be able to have like a surface where you can do it all in one place.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. I tried to use the other kind of tablets several years ago and I could not do it. It hurt my brain to draw and not be able to look at what I was doing. I just couldn't do it. I just kept giving up and going back to like either pencil and paper or like, mouse work or whatever.
Yeah. And so I know because someone else had asked a question, when you're drawing on the digital tablet, do you use Procreate at all?
I have used Procreate. I don't use it for this. I'm using Clip Studio Paint.
I think Procreate, is that the Apple exclusive one? Okay, because I have some friends who use that for their art, and I'm always jealous because it looks so cool and everything. But I'm like, I don't have Apple product. It's pretty cool. I have a lot of students who use it, and I know enough about it to help them with their projects. But I don't regularly use it, largely because I have this thing and I have Clip Studio Paint, and I love Clip Studio Paint. Okay, so so one person had asked, just to stay on this topic, what advice you had for an artist just starting on Procreate, but because you don't primarily use that, I'd ask that and expand that to like, what advice do you have for artists who are starting with different digital art programs or starting with any of the programs that you use?
Yeah, sure. I'd say, if you're trying to find which program is right for you, sometimes that decision will be made based on availability. So Procreate is pretty accessible to a lot of people. Clip Studio costs some money, but it's basically a one-time install download.
Yeah.
So if you buy it once, you're not paying a monthly rate for it.
Right.
Photoshop, like Adobe's notorious for now their Creative Cloud and their.
I hate that they did that. I was just about ready to go and buy myself Photoshop when suddenly they're like, actually, we're going to switch to the monthly subscription. I was like, no, I don't want that.
Yeah, I hung on to my copy of CS6 for too long because I was like in a personal boycott, I guess.
Yeah.
But I was still using the monthly subscription for work. But yeah, so I think availability is probably going to dictate that for a lot of folks. But if you have the means to try a bunch of different software, it couldn't hurt to do that. Sketchbook Pro, Procreate, Clip Studio Paint, Photoshop. Those are 4 pretty big ones. Those are the ones I really know. So I couldn't tell you.
Other digital artists make fun of me for using GIMP. But
oh yeah,
I'm going to be honest that I love GIMP, and then I show people, they're like, how'd you make something that detailed in GIMP? I'm like, the same way you'd make it anywhere else. It's just, but yeah, you would judge me. A lot of my friends would judge me. My husband, who doesn't even do digital art, judges me for it too. So it's okay.
I've never used it. I've had students who use it. They tend to be, the ones who use it are like in. They're like all about it. And sometimes it's philosophical about the open source.
That's part of it, I think, that I just get like so caught up in like the open source stuff. But yeah, I mean, a lot of these programs sound really cool, and I probably should try new ones out at some point. I get into a zone where I'm like, I know how to use this thing, and I don't want to learn how to use anything else because it will be too different from this thing, and it becomes a problem.
Yeah. I personally love Clip Studio Paint because it is designed to mimic some of the tools that I already used as an illustrator, like a lot of technical pens and brush and ink systems that I was already familiar with. Like I feel like the mechanics of them are replicated really well as tools.
Oh, cool.
So I kind of like it. And then it takes that and combines it with the best of Photoshop, the way it handles layers and transparencies and things. So I didn't really have to do a lot of gear changing to adapt to it. And that's why I like it. It doesn't work for everyone, but I think it's another one of those pieces of software where the people who are into it are like into it.
I like this question because this question is a little more like business related, I guess, being, someone who does client work and things like that. So this person says, I'd love to hear what happens when you're micromanaged either by the author or by a publisher or editor. I guess she said, I'm dealing with micromanaging at my job right now, so looking for coping mechanisms. But I do think that's an interesting topic when it comes to like balancing your own best ideas and what you view as the best possible idea for the project versus someone else having a different idea in mind and how you balance that. So I'd love to hear about how you work with that when it comes to working with other people who are, paying for the project and things like that.
That's a really good question. In my experience, and I'm 41, so this goes back literally 20 years. I've been doing this for about 20 years. it took me a while to really like adapt to this, but one of the things that really helped me was graduate school, strangely. And it's not because grad school teaches you about working with clients. It was more like I started teaching as a TA. I taught some classes, some design drawing classes, and that kind of got me like teaching made me like made me find new vocabulary for things that I kind of did almost instinctively at that point. And I think the key thing is to communicate. So if you're working with someone and they have their fingers all over the project, so to speak, a lot of times what's happening is there's maybe a barrier in communication. And so you just need to find a way to communicate with that person, to either talk through your own ideas or try to wrap your head around their ideas. I think something that I've benefited from has been my position as an educator has allowed me to kind of like educate clients, so to basically on that includes, I think, editors or writers or, other stakeholders, to educate them into why I made the choices I made, why, how I'm interpreting the choices they are describing. And sometimes that changes things and sometimes it doesn't. But what it allows us to do is come to some sort of consensus and at least see where each other are coming from so we can kind of understand the path forward better.
Yeah, I think that's important. And that's one thing I've loved about this whole process is, we'll have calls, we'll have meetings, we talk through the process. And I've never worked with a big 5 publisher or anything like that, so I don't know the process there. But I've noticed one of the things I like about the small press experience is, having that ability to communicate directly and be part of the entire process from beginning to end, I think is really cool.
Yeah. A long time ago when I was a junior designer, I wasn't really part of client meetings or anything. And I would basically be handed a brief. So someone would come by and they'd hand me like a folder and say like, all right, here's a bunch of notes on how to proceed. So go to it. But that information was only as good as the person communicating it to me.
Yeah.
And, and it was probably pretty good, but like if they were communicating it for themselves, it may not land totally with me, and there may be some like deficiency that I'd have. So what I've noticed is I'm better as a designer and as an illustrator when I can work one-on-one with the author or the client or whatever stakeholders, when I can be part of that initial conversation.
Yeah.
Because I can sort of pick up on things socially, I think, that I wouldn't have otherwise. So that's something too. I don't know if that's going to land with the person who asked this question or not.
I think it's important. I think that's, communication, I think, is important in everything. And it can be really hard to know if someone is interpreting something the same way that you're intending it. And we always have a lot of meetings and I like that. I think it's good for having a good end product.
Yeah.
So someone else asked, I would love to hear about your experience as a freelancer, and important do's and don'ts for beginner freelancers and designers.
Okay. So I've been freelancing the whole time I've been out of school.
Yeah.
But a lot more part-time as of late. I've been teaching full-time for 8 years or 9 years, I guess. When I was in grad school, I didn't have time to do that either. And then I've mostly been fully employed a lot of the time, but there've been a couple of years where I was sort of on my own and attempted to do some full-time freelance work, full-time consulting work. It's hard.
Oh yeah.
It's very hard. And I'm going to say that I'm not great at it, at the business part of it. I'm okay with that. Like, I found the path for me that works, but my advice to people starting out is like really know your time, really know like how long it takes you to do stuff. And also really think about what market you're in and what the community can bear. So if you're in a small town, like town of like 5,000 people or something, there's not going to be a lot of market for graphic design or illustration. But if you're working with people on the East and West Coast, or in Chicago, then that's a different story. So like, think about the market you're in, think about who you're competing with, think about who you know. So much of my work has come through people I know, people I've already met. Like these book covers came because I'd worked with Christine previously on Halftime Magazine, doing illustration work for that. So strangely, that kind of turned into something, and that was several years ago that I did those pieces. So like I also have a project that I'm working on right now, a logo project, through the agency that I interned with in 2001.
Oh, wow.
So like I've stayed in touch with those people, and I've worked on things with them over the last couple decades, really. So having a good network really helps. And also, if you're in a small enough place, diversification can really help too. Meaning, like, if it's a small town, you may need to also be like a photographer and like a graphic designer and a web designer and an illustrator.
Yeah.
Because that might be how the market is used to seeing people there. And if you only do one of those things, you may not get that much work. I'm also a firm believer in Jessica Heish's advice of charging by the project rather than by the hour.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. She lays them all out beautifully on her blog. But one of the key parts of it is an hourly rate benefits slow workers rather than fast workers. So if you're working to hit a deadline, you're going to be paid less than if you're kind of overreaching on your deadlines consistently. You're going to be paid more, and that's sort of disingenuous and goes against the spirit of being paid to do creative work in the first place. So it's not that things should be like a menu, like a logo is, X $100, but thinking of it as kind of a little bit of a menu could maybe help at times.
I always find it hard to figure out how to price my freelance work. Like when people are like, oh, how much would you charge to do this? How much would you charge to do this? Sometimes it can be hard to be like, oh, I like, when it comes to editing something, if I'm doing copy editing for a project or something, I might look at how many words it is and say, I'll charge this much per word, or maybe I'll try to estimate like how long it might take and then do a rough estimate to calculate it in my head. But it can be really hard. So when you're deciding to charge per project, what you want to charge for each project, like how do you determine what you think you're going to want to charge for each project that you get assigned?
Well, there's two answers to this. The first is the real answer, which is currently like I have a full-time teaching job and I'm not really doing this for the money. So I charge what I think it seems worth, and I cut people a bit of a break when I need to.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of that going on in my life at the moment, just because it's like I only really take projects that I really want to work on these days. But back when I did it a little more seriously, I think I had some influence from so when I was in high school and college, I painted houses as my summer job. My dad's a music teacher and a retired music teacher. And he had a house painting crew with some other teacher friends. And we would spend our summers scraping, priming, and painting houses in New Hampshire and Vermont. It's terrible work. I made a lot of money. But the interesting thing I learned from it was they would always bid on a project. So, someone calls up and says, yeah, we'd like our house done. We got your name from this other person. Could you come by and give a quote? And so my dad and his friends would say, yeah, as the leaders of this crew, they'd say, yeah, they go out, they'd like look at the house, they'd kind of calculate how many sides it is, how many windows they'd have to paint. They do a rough estimate based on what they think it would take for time. And it was always pretty ballpark, but we would pretty much stick with that. So there were some houses where we would be making more and some that we'd be making less per hour, because we weren't paid consistently. We were paid based on, like if you have to end up replacing a bunch of clapboards because they've rotted away and you didn't know that, that's a problem, and it can eat up a lot of time, and then you end up just basically making less money. So that's actually kind of how I do it now. I kind of take an hourly rate and I think, oh, okay, well, this will probably take, between this chunk of time and this chunk of time. So that'll be, I don't know, $500.
Yeah.
So it could be like, if I happen to really nail it, maybe it'll be 300. It would have been $300. And if it takes me forever, it might've been $800.
Yeah.
But
kind of averages out over time.
I try to keep a nice average, because if I really nail something, why should I make half the money?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I found that I like to, when I'm running my company, I like to pay people per project as well, and also pay, like, even if it's a regular employee, like, oh, you're going to do this weekly for me, or okay, well, I'll pay this much for that amount, as opposed to like logging hours. That just also is like a logistical mess. And
yeah.
I think it's annoying when as like a business owner, it's annoying for me to want to have people's logged hours and things like that. It's annoying for me to log my hours for other people too. So I'm like, nah, let's just do it per project. So
yeah. I've had to log my hours for a number of things, and I'm just so happy that I don't really have to do that anymore.
Especially because it's like, especially if you're someone who's like me and like you, who's like working on a ton of projects at once, and you're like logging your hours, and then you have to switch another project because something came up for it, and now your hours are like, okay, I worked 2 hours today, but it was like in 10-minute blocks over the course of the day, and I gotta write all that down, and it's so frustrating.
Yeah. At my old agency job, I would have like 8 or 10 client projects going at a time. And if I might go out and get a cup of coffee, like at the Starbucks around the corner, and then come back, and then all of a sudden I'm energized to work on one because the fresh air and the caffeine like got me psyched up to work on a thing that I didn't, that I hadn't been thinking about. And so then I'd switch gears and like spend an hour on that. And then you have to, I don't know. Yeah. It's weird because it's thought work. A lot of it is really about thought work and not just the punching a clock, scraping a house kind of work. So
yeah, I guess it makes more sense in that case. Like you mentioned thought work, like if you're doing an hourly rate, that's more for like if you're doing a specific actions that can be tracked in terms of time. But when it comes to something where you have to conceptualize something, or you have to solve something, you have to figure something out, the work isn't really, it's not really measured in the same way, because it could take longer or shorter depending on the human factor and all of that.
Yeah. Have you seen, I don't really watch The Big Bang Theory, but I've watched some of it in the past. And there's one episode where they show the main guys, who are a bunch of scientists, go to their lab and do, like, they get to work. And it's, I think, the funniest scene in the whole show, because they just stand around staring at like an equation on the board, and Eye of the Tiger is playing. And they have like these dramatic cuts, and it's just like a full day of work, and these guys are just standing there like looking at it, and then they'll like lie down on the ground and like stare at the ceiling.
Well, I'm one of those rare people that still defends The Big Bang Theory in 2021. I liked that show the entire time it ran. From the beginning when it was cool to like it, until the end when people made fun of me and called me a basic bitch for liking it or whatever. But no, dude, Big Bang Theory is funny, and I stand by that.
That's my favorite scene from all of the episodes I've seen.
It was pretty funny, yeah. Great. So I guess in terms of like moving towards, the book cover that you're designing that I wrote right now, that's coming out in June, guys. I guess I want to know, about your process of approaching this book specifically, which is more for the audience because I've been in every meeting with you.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I guess could you talk about what this project has been like, and like how you, because even when like Christine would just so for context, Christine is the owner of Muse Media, the publishing company, and she's the publisher of this book. So even when she would talk to me about like, you know, stuff from the book and the cover, and then she would present ideas to you, you know, when you came back with the rough sketches, you would have like a ton of different ideas and layouts and like all of these really interesting concepts that lead towards a cool end product. So how did you go about, you know, coming up with the concepts for this and the layout ideas and all of that?
When we had our first meeting, and you talked about the Back to the Future connection pretty quickly.
Yeah.
There was, I think we had talked about, like you and Christine had a couple of ideas. I don't remember whose was whose or whatever.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking like, well, could we do kind of a spoof? Could we just get away with that on the cover? And so I was pretty energized by that idea, and I wanted to make sure that I sketched it out. So
yeah,
this project was very natural for me. I think it hits
cool.
it hits a lot of notes that I like to hit.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's pop culture-y, it's retro, it's got some retro vibes. You know, Back to the Future obviously like is a connection.
Yeah.
And I felt like I kind of got the characters too. I think that's another important part. When you described the characters to me, they kind of clicked in my mind. I didn't feel like I was going to need to ideate a lot with them.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Just the way they were described. I thought, okay, I get this kid and I get this kid. I know how they're dressed. I know how their hair styles are going to look. And so, you know, there was a little bit of playing around with it, but I felt like I'd kind of get that pretty quickly. And so that freed me up to think about the rest of the cover sketches. I'm not sure. I don't know. It was a fun afternoon. I just kind of sat down and sketched a bunch of things. I think I put on some Star Trek on the television and just kind of like banged through a bunch of thumbnails, and so they were all pretty rough. So but luckily I can sketch very quickly and tirelessly in a lot of ways. So I just kind of did it and sent you more than I think I intended to because I couldn't stop.
Yeah, and I just thought it was so cool how, like, because I had sent you a document, like, just so everyone knows, what I did was basically what we were saying earlier. I went through the novel and I pulled out paragraphs that had any visual descriptions of the characters or any visual descriptions of, you know, what they would wear or what their hair looked like or what their face looked like or things like that. And I put it in a document. And like, it's still, even though I sent you that, it still feels like you read my mind because they came back and I'm like, yeah, like that's what they look like. Yes, exactly. Like it was exactly what it's like in my head. And then on top of that, like, because I hadn't described what Nicole was wearing at all. But then you're like, well, what if we designed her sweater to look kind of like Wesley Crusher on Star Trek? And I was like, you didn't even read the book, but like she has his kind of vibes a little bit. And I was like, yes. So yeah, it was just a brilliant connection. I loved it.
I was picking up what you were putting down.
Yeah, I could tell. So I've been so excited about this cover from the beginning. And I think everybody knows that because I've mentioned on this channel multiple times, like every time I do an update on this book, I'm like, by the way, the cover is fantastic. I can't show it to you yet, but it is so amazing. It'll blow your mind.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so that's been a fun process, and it's also really been fun to be part of all of the processes. And I've noticed that, like, you know, when it comes to I guess this being a small press, and, you know, Christine mentioning when she first drew up the contracts for this and everything, how much she wanted this to be like an author-friendly press. And I think that's so cool how, like, from the beginning, like, even when, you know, we were doing Courtney's book for Confessions of a Teenage Band Geek, and she would be on every meeting, and now I'm on every meeting, and it's like I give input and stuff. It's just really cool to have it be such a team effort, especially when, you know, you hear a lot of publishers, you know, taking creative control away from an author, or taking, you know, so like if someone says like more micromanaging a graphic designer or something like that, it seems cool that there's a collaborative element to this.
Yeah, I prefer that so much.
Mhm.
Like, if I was illustrating a book cover, like, I definitely would want to at least loosely touch base with the author.
Yes.
Like, that's always my preferred way of working, just to see, because they have ideas. Obviously, they write the books, so.
Yeah, and then you get kind of the combination of like, someone who wrote the book goes for a certain tone and a certain feeling that you can't always convey just from like sending snippets of what the descriptions are, and then the designer will have some ideas that maybe the author didn't think of, and it's just cool to have to bounce ideas and build off of each other. I think that leads to a really great end product.
Yeah, I love my contribution to this cover, which I feel like is the inclusion of the driver's ed car.
I love the driver's ed car. I love it. Yeah.
And I know it's not like a plot point that the car has anything to do with the story. But the driver's ed test is a part of the story, and that was enough of a hook to get me to think about how you can tie that into Back to the Future.
Well, I mean, it definitely does tie it in the sense that one of the characters drives through the time portal at first. So it's the car does go back in time in a different way than in other things, but the car does go back in time, which is cool. And that was the thing, was like, I never even went in depth with describing any of the cars or anything, so I love how you were just like, here's a car, and I loved it. I think the car looks great. Yeah.
I think it's like my grandmother's Toyota from the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, it looks good to me. I love it. Yeah. Awesome. So I guess, to finish off, I know you're working on like a board game and you're working on some graphic novels and some other things. What are some of the other projects you're working on right now that we can look forward to seeing in the future?
Yeah, well, I am, as you know, I'm on sabbatical from my teaching job this year, which I could wax poetic about for a long time, but this is the best year to be on a sabbatical.
Yes.
Because it means I can stay in my house and work on creative projects all year. And in fact, that was my sabbatical proposal, which I proposed prior to COVID, basically.
Yeah, it just worked out really well.
Yeah, my timing was about as perfect as can be. It's also kind of a terrible year to be on sabbatical because I can't travel, which is a big thing that people associate with sabbaticals, but it's not a requirement. So I couldn't really go anywhere. I kind of have been confined to like these four walls. But yeah, so I've been filling my time with a lot of fun things. I'm working on a board game with my friend Dave Beck, who's one of my colleagues at the university. It's called Distilled. It's a board game about distilling spirits. And it was something he came up with when he was on sabbatical last year. He was in Scotland for his.
Cool.
He was going on distillery tours and had the idea to sort of turn that into how to gamify the distilling process. So it's a pretty cool game. It's going to hit Kickstarter this summer.
I cannot wait. I'm going to pre-order it.
Yeah, July. So,
While I have never worked with distilling, I am a big fan of just like trying different bourbons and things like that. So like I love that kind of thing. And then on top of that, my father-in-law and brother-in-law are working on starting a brewery together to brew their own beer and that kind of thing. So it's just really fun to like watch their process and learn about that. So I'm just like really excited for this game.
Yeah, me too. We just got a couple of printed prototypes made, and every iteration of every iteration of the game that I see, like this is going to sound weird, I'm impressed with my own work, which sounds ridiculous.
I know exactly what you mean. It's not weird at all.
I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, this is great. And it's so lovely to have that feeling, because I don't always get that from a project. So it's great. So I'm very pleased with it. If anyone's interested in it, distilledgame.com or distilledgame on Instagram.
I will link it in the description below, because I want to make sure everyone is aware. I mean, Kickstarter is so great. Like that's how I launched my business on Kickstarter. Kickstarter does a lot. I'm so glad that you're going to be doing it that way, because I love contributing to Kickstarter campaigns. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, the other thing I'm working on is my other graphic novel. So the last graphic novel I put out was this one, The Beast of Wolf's Bay. That was a Kickstarter. And that came out in 2013. It's a modern adaptation of Beowulf. It's sort of horror comedy, like a lot of pop culture stuff in there. It's not really scary. Although it got, I think, listed on a lot of like horror blogs and stuff. But the thing people mostly know me from is Gods of Asgard.
Yeah.
And this came out in 2007. I've always wanted to do a follow-up to it. And it took me a long time to figure out exactly how I was going to do that. And should I adapt like another set of world mythology, right? Like, so I thought about, moving on to like another mythic system. But ultimately I realized that I had left out a lot of myths from the Norse myths when I adapted it the first time, like the ones that didn't really neatly fit into the narrative I was putting together. And I came up with an idea on how to connect them all. So that's kind of what I'm working on now. And that, I don't know when that'll be out. My hope is in the next year or so. The art's coming along. The script is done. And it's going to require several more months of work. So I don't want to speak too soon on that, but that's coming along. It doesn't really have a name yet either. But if anyone's interested in that, you can follow me on my social media.
So for the books that you already have out, where can people buy those?
They're available on Amazon and occasionally at your friendly local comic book store. Although they're mostly on Amazon these days, largely because of distribution and how comic distribution works.
I will make sure, I will link Eric's social media and website and Amazon for his books in the description below. So definitely check all of that out. Stay tuned for his board game coming on Kickstarter soon, which I cannot wait for. So I'm going to be like the first one to order it there. Thank you so much for talking with me and for doing this Q&A. I'm really thankful for your fantastic work for my book cover, and I cannot wait for the book to release and for people to get it this June.
Yeah, right on. Me too. Thanks for having me. And I'm excited about it too.
Check it out. I've got my Business Guru Magnetic Poetry mug. So if you like Business Guru Magnetic Poetry, or if you like to make fun of it with me, the sayings like, be unapologetically yourself. I love Jesus, but I cuss though. All those things that all the business gurus, they say, they're not original, This mug is linked in my merch store in the description below. Also, please don't forget to subscribe to the second channel, Your Morning Guru, where every single morning at 8 a.m. Central, my friend RK and I live our lives as various business gurus. This week we're living as Marie Kondo. You may notice that my office is already looking a whole lot cleaner because I have been eliminating things, cleaning things, organizing things in my house, and if you want to join us for that, we have been having a great time every single weekday morning at 8 a.m. Central, so join us over there. Otherwise, I will have another video ready for you guys this Friday. Maybe there will be a bonus video Wednesday. I'm not sure yet. I'm still figuring things out. But this Friday's video is going to be huge, so stay tuned for that. I can't wait to announce what it's about because it's something that a lot of you have specifically asked me for, so I'm excited. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to follow all of my publisher, Muse Media, all of their social media, which is listed in my pinned comment below. So don't forget to check everything out with them. Follow them for updates on this book. This book will be coming out in June of 2021. We are 2 months away from the book release. There will be a live stream launch party for it on this channel, and I'm just so excited for that. So I will see you guys again tomorrow morning on Your Morning Guru, or this Friday again on this channel. But in the meantime, don't forget to support small businesses and have a fantastic start to your week. Bye, everybody.
Get you some nuts.
There was lots of memes.
Makes me wonder if I should take up lesbianism.
Chicago. You guys asked for it.